Hi, everyone. I'm Jackie Madden Haugh, and I'm here today to talk to you about your legacy. We all have one. But before I do, I want to give a big shout out to Terry Leidick, my publisher. Terry and I met several years ago when I had no idea what I was doing in the writing world. I still don't. But with her loving guidance and her patience, I've now written 4 books. And I owe it all to her. And if you are thinking about writing a book, I suggest you reach out to her because she is amazing. I'd like to give a shout out to John Daly as well, who helped me put this together because I'm technologically an idiot. And it felt like we had talked for hours. I'm sure it was just a few minutes, but he finally set me up on this. So this is my first one, so bear with me. Anyway, back to my story. Today I want to talk to you about the book that was published 2 years ago. It's called The Promise I Kept. And here it is. I don't know if you can all see this. It's the story of a father and daughter at the end of his life. It's the caregiving story of a daughter who took care of his physical needs and a father who took care of her spiritual ones. Back when I was a little girl, the dinner table conversation was always, when we get old, we don't want to be a burden, and we want you to put us in a home. Now, when I was 5 years old, I thought, what home am I putting you in? But as I grew up, I began to see what they were talking about. Many years later, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, had lived with my parents when she was 92, but by 98, they couldn't handle it anymore, and they had to put her in a nursing home. And this one day, my dad and I were going to go visit her, and he had had a stroke several years before. So he could walk, but it was very challenging. He had to have a cane. It was very slow, and his left arm was dead from the stroke. And as we're going up the wheelchair ramp to go see her, he started shaking uncontrollably. And if I didn't know better, I would have thought he was having an epileptic attack. I grabbed him and held on to him. And in that moment, he divulged to me his deepest, darkest fear. I think as we all get older, we develop all kinds of fears. We're afraid of dying. We're afraid of what the process is going to look like and how much pain we will be. We're afraid, like my mother was afraid she'd be in a wheelchair because she lived a life of excruciating pain, and it was mostly revolved around her legs. For my father, it was being put in a home, being put away. And in that moment, I held on to him tightly. And I would tell him anything he wanted to hear, just so he would calm down. And so, of course, I promised, Dad, this will never be you. You will never go into a nursing home. Now, truth be told, I didn't think I'd have to do it. It was back in 1990. I was a young mother with 4 small children, ranging from 8 to 2, 3 girls and a boy. And my life was crazy with kids. Thinking about taking care of my father was at least 50 years away. So I let the promise sit in the back burners, and I let life unfold. Before you knew it, the kids had grown up. They were now teenagers, preparing to leave the nest. I had done a lot of work with my mother, a lot of taking care of her over the years, and she had passed away. And like I said, my husband had left me. And I looked at my father and I thought, oh my God, what do I do? I need to take care of my dad. So for all you women out there, you probably can relate to this. We women do everything. We're super women, right? At least my kids always thought I was. So the thought of taking in a man now who is in a wheelchair and slowly going blind was no problem. No problem at all. I can do this. And for the next 9 years, life became about my dad. At first, it wasn't too bad because I was able to get him some home care because that's what he wanted. He had this brilliant mind and he did not want to be a burden. He wanted to be in his own home. So for several years, I would go and visit him every single day, right in the middle of my workday, and visit with him, do his mail, do his bills, check up on things. But as the years rolled around, I began to feel like the care was becoming very uncaring. Nobody talked to him. Nobody visited him. They just dumped him in a chair and they went off, to whatever they were doing in the rest of the house. Finally, one day I had it. I'd had it with driving back and forth a half hour each way to find him unhappy. I was tired. My work life was suffering because of it. And I demanded he come live with me. So I set up the house for him and his chair, his wheelchair, and his hospital bed. And I knew I could do it all. How quickly did I realize I was wrong? Now, for any of you out there who have done any caregiving, you know what I mean when I say it's a thankless job. It's hard, and we're not prepared for it. I wasn't prepared for the fatigue. I wasn't prepared for the boredom. I wasn't prepared for the smells. Let's face it, adult diapers are a lot different than a baby's diaper. I wasn't prepared for the isolation, the loss of money. I was not prepared. But I took my father in, and at first it was just me doing his physical needs. But then all of a sudden there was a shift. We started talking about his life. My father was a very quiet, private man. And as a little girl, I don't really remember him sitting there talking to me unless I asked him a question and I got the bullet point answer. There was no going deep into thoughts and fears and dreams and wishes. He kept those to himself. But over the next few years, there was a great awakening in me to who this man was. My father was an Irish Catholic, devout Catholic man. And he lived his life with such gratitude. He lived his life optimistically that things would always work out. And if they didn't work out the way we wanted them to, they would still work out somehow. He woke up every morning thankful that he had air in his lungs and that he had another day to live. And I asked him one time, I said, Dad, how do you do this? At this point, he was 95. And I said, there's nothing, you can't read anymore because he'd gone blind. He could barely see the TV. I put headphones on him so he could at least hear it. But he just sat in a chair all day long. And he just said, you don't know until you're faced with it. So I said, okay, Dad. Yeah, but I know I'm going to be really crabby. But as the days passed, I saw my father to be the closest thing to God that I'd ever seen before. He was a truly kind, loving, generous heart. And he taught me about how I want to live my life. When I took my father in, it was in 2003, sorry. That's when my mother passed. And I was an angry woman. I was angry that I was a single mom. I was angry that my mother died before I was ready to let her go, and it wasn't a pretty death. I was angry that my 4 kids now were gone. They were on to their lives. I had lost my spiritual connection to the universe, to the divine, to God. And I was living a pretty shallow life. And having my father with me taught me how wrong I was. He taught me how I want to go forward with my life. He taught me that I wanted to live a life of gratitude because there's always something to be grateful for. So I cared for him physically, and he opened up my heart spiritually. And as it got closer to his death, I asked him what he thought his legacy was. And he looked out the window for a minute and then looked at me and said, well, of course, your kids. And I thought, thanks, Dad. And then it was his money. But I sat back and I said, no, Dad, that's not what it is. I said, I'm going to write a book about our experience together because I believe your legacy is your gift of faith, is your gift of surrender that you allow yourself to do and that you've taught me to do. You have been an incredible example of how I want my life to be, not how it is now, but what I want my life to be. Often people think your legacy are the things you leave behind. And yes, he left behind me, but so much of who I am is because of him. And so that got me thinking about all legacies. Now, as I was writing his book, I met a gentleman who was asking me about the projects I was working on. And he said to me, you know, there are 3 stages of death. The first is when your last friend dies. The second is when you die. And the third is when no one says your name. And he looked at me and he said, the fact that you write so much about your family, your parents, your brothers, your children, your family is going to live forever. Because there'll be books out there long after you're gone where the names are going to be repeated over and over again. And that got me thinking about how I could help others create their legacies. Sadly, I think we've become a society of read and delete. We have computers that we can quickly put off an email. We don't write letters anymore. We are sending each other's texts. It wasn't too long ago, I found a box of love letters in my attic. And I opened it up and I cried and I giggled over these. Back in the 60s and 70s when I was starting to date, we weren't allowed to talk long on the phone because it cost money. And if we were far apart, we wrote letters. And it wasn't just a line or two. It were all the things that we thought about. What was happening in our day, what we wanted for them. Pages and pages of binder paper, single-lined. And so as I put the box away, I remember feeling sad that maybe my daughters were never going to have this at 60 years old. That, they've all had notes from boyfriends. But whenever I was able to look at them, they were sweet, but there was hardly anything said in them because they got them quickly in other ways. And I think what we write and leave behind says so much about who we are. I mean, I love those love letters. I love the letters my dad wrote to my mother. There are things in those letters, even when he talked to me, that went so much deeper than the actual words. So my thought today for all of you is, what is your legacy going to look like? What do you want to leave behind? And let's face it, we're not all writers, unless you have someone like Terry in your corner. But there are ways for all of us to be creative and leave who we are behind for those that we love. Now, when I think about what my legacy is, I think my legacy is my love for my family. Everything I write about is about all of us. After my first book, My Life in a Tutu, I ended up with a column in the local newspaper. And I was told just to write about what I thought about. And so much of it, well, practically all of it, is about my kids and myself and the things we went through and what we learned from them. So I believe what I'm going to be able to leave behind for my kids and my grandchildren are the stories of who we all were and what we meant to each other. Now, like I know we're not all writers, we're not all going to write a book, but there are ways to leave something behind in the written form. When things my kids don't know about, which maybe they'll find out after they see this video, is I write them letters. And I put them in envelopes and they're in a box for them to read after I'm gone. We can all write a letter. We could journal and take just a few minutes here and there to write down a thought. And if any of you are interested, I have a whole series of really creative ideas of how you can leave your story behind. And maybe it's not, letters or journals or books. Maybe you're an artist. Maybe you like to paint. Maybe you're a musician. Maybe there's something that really talks about who you are, and you can take pictures of those things and maybe write a note next to them. What prompted you to paint that picture? Where were you? What were you thinking about? That musical instrument, where did you play it? What songs did you love? All those things can say a lot about a person. So I leave you with this thought of a woman who spent 9 years caring for my father, to not be afraid to write things down, to not be afraid to talk to your loved ones, especially your parents, about their lives and ask them the hard questions. I know I had to ask my dad several hard questions, and he was not happy with me. One of them was about how he wanted to die. He was 97 at the time, and he was going to live to 100. And I said, I know, Dad, but I want to know, because I want it to be how you would like it to be. I didn't get to ask my mom, and her death was not pretty. It was a horrible death. And I wish I had known then what I know now. So he calmed down, and he told me how he wanted it to look. And thank God, because when he passed in my arms, a beautiful, beautiful death, his funeral and how everything he wanted was perfect. And that made all of us feel really wonderful that we could give him the send-off that he was looking for. So don't be afraid to ask the questions. Write the answers down. One day we will not be here, but our stories can go on forever for the future generation. I now have 2 grandsons. I want them to know me. I'm 67 now, and I pray I have another 30 years, but I may not. And if that's the case, I want them to know how much I love them and how I thought about them and my dreams for them. So I hope this video finds you well. I know it's tough out there. It's been tough for everybody. We've all lost so much. We've lost a lot of milestones that we took for granted before. I'm a dance teacher. One day we were jumping around the room, and the next it was gone. There's no end of the year show. Teachers weren't able to say goodbye to their students on the last day. There are no senior proms or senior balls or junior proms, no graduations. This is tough, but we'll get through it. We'll be stronger for it. But I pray that it keeps you are all safe and that your loved ones are safe. And I leave you with a blessing and a prayer that you take this time to reflect and to jot some things down. So if you'd like that pamphlet that I was telling you about, you can go to my Facebook page, Jackie Madden Haugh, and send me a note, and I'll be sure you get this. You'll get one of those. And I thank you for this opportunity to tell my story, the promise I kept. And I wish you all a blessed life. Bye.